And welcome everybody to another wonderful week right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Got a big show planned for you. Of course, we'll be covering, near and dear to my heart is holding government accountable for spending. And State Auditor Ball had a presentation her office did in front of the House Appropriations and Revenue Committee last week that is creating quite a stir for those of you who are paying attention to that side of things. What does government spend money on? It did take the mainstream media a few days to catch on. I started making posts, of course, about this early on before them. If you wanted to check out some of those posts or see what's going on, you can check out my social medias at KY Cooperrider on X. On Facebook, just search Andrew Cooperrider. You can also head over to theandrewshow.com. You can find all the links and places where you can listen to this show. If you're missing on things, obviously, if you're listening on the podcast format, we ask that you leave a 5-star review. But if you missed my post about it, it's funny, early on, I cited what committee this was in, where the report could be found, in the comments there, letting people know how to navigate to it. But yet, despite this, many leftists claimed I was making it up. There was nothing to be seen here. I have no sources. No normal media is reporting on this yet. Well, they were a little slower to the draw, almost like they weren't as interested in this story as I was. And then perhaps maybe they started seeing how much you all cared about it from posts like mine and others. And suddenly they did start to pay attention. But I want to break down exactly what was said in this meeting. And if we have time, Beshear had a little bit of a response to it. So we'll be going over all that today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So first, I want to start us off with this first clip about the process that was followed to do this. Let's go ahead and take a listen. We'll be doing this in just like clips like we often do when I analyze in a little bit longer of a video. Let's see what we got here.
And just by way, also by background, and you've already alluded to this, there are no uniform use of expenditure codes. So we work with it a lot. We have a lot of familiarity. We often know what it is that we're looking at. And it's difficult because there are sometimes, there's no uniformity. There's also no uniform level of detail about the basis and support for particular expenditures. You've already alluded to that as well. And another thing is that expenditures are not recorded in real time.
So I don't want to miss what she said there, because I think this is one of the bigger parts of this story that, of course, the media isn't reporting on as much, that I think is very important to us as the taxpayer. So what she just said there was that she and others, there's disadvantages to their process. So what they did and how this information came about is they went into the EMARS data system, which is essentially a state data system where they're logging their expenses as they go. It's kind of like, a check registry of sorts. And so it's the intergovernmental processing for expenses overall. And she was pointing out that within that, Allison Ball had some difficulties figuring out some of these transactions because there is no uniform use of expenditure codes, no uniform level of detail. Expenditures are not recorded in real time. Reporting practices sometimes raise more questions than they answer. This is important to realize because when you talk about what Beshear responded with to this report, which he largely ignored most of it and then zeroed in on a few things that he could argue she didn't quite get. Well, the reason why she missed information was because it wasn't there, and it should have been. Anybody who knows that if you're trying to find financial transparency, it's key to make sure people are uniformly coding things so we know what the money was spent on, but also providing enough detail about what they're spending money on. So that way, when it comes time to make the budget, we know what we actually need, what don't we need, what are we wasting money on? Do we really need to buy that again? There's many examples of this all across government, where they have stock rooms full of equipment and supplies they will never use and they just bought in order to use up their budget. And then we're not able to look at that and say, well, that was wasteful. And this is part of the reason why there is no uniformity. And this is an overall problem, I think, within the state of Kentucky across the board, because just go through some of the financial transparency. So you have no uniform accounting, making it hard to track. The A&R committee and members of the legislature have made several statements alluding to the fact that they don't actually know what we're spending our money on exactly. They're having a hard time tracing. They know, like, obviously these contracts that get awarded and things, because there's a database of those exact contracts and they're written and filed. But when it comes to like what's in the base, what are they spending money on that they're maybe not seeking out a contract on? How many staff do they have? What are all these staff doing? That's not in there. They can't find that. They can't figure it out, so they don't know quite how much they can cut, where they can cut, where are we wasting money, where are we not. So they've talked about that. You have this problem with reporting out of the Beshear administration. You've got, of course, JCPS and an open records request. They admitted that they have no centralized banking system to track bank accounts and credit cards of individual schools. When somebody asked for those documents in an open records request, that was their response. We don't have anything. Then you have, because we don't have a way to track it. You've got Fayette County Public Schools just had an external audit talking about how they didn't have financial security in place in order to oversee budget and expenses and see exactly what we're spending money on, what's good, what's bad. This problem across the board is how you get ripe for not just misuse, but abuse of tax dollars. And what I mean by that is whenever it's this murky where our money is going, it gives opportunity for those who would take advantage to go ahead and take advantage of the system. And there's actually some whispers of that within it as we continue on. Let's keep listening, though, to this presentation.
So we are happy to come in and try and shed light where it can be pretty murky, just given how it's filed. So with that, I'm going to actually turn over to my general counsel.
Sure, your microphone's close enough to you and green. Thank you.
So I think you may have heard everything I said, but basically, fiscal year 25, executive branch spent $39 million on advertising. Every executive branch entity has some form of a communications team that they can staff with basically whomever they want. One expenditure we noted was a total of $2.4 million paid to an entity called Red 7E. The CEO of Red 7E has made several political contributions to the governor over the last several years, and they have a master agreement with the state, and they are the second highest paid advertising vendor that the state uses. What have we expended our money on there? Well, CHFS paid about $250,000 for an ad campaign that told people to get the COVID vaccine. And then the Kentucky Historical Society expenditure you see there.
So pausing there, first, let's hit this first big number. $39 million, over $39 million spent on advertising by our government. Now, last I checked, the government's not a business. What is it that they're advertising? Then they also point out every executive branch entity has some form of communications team. Obviously, every group's going to have, if you got social media, you got to prepare press releases, you got to, deal with if news calls in with questions, you need somebody to handle that. So obviously, each of these departments is going to have a media relations person that does marketing, that does PR, that makes sure the group looks good. It's also important, of course, if you're trying to get funding, that people think what you're doing is important. So I can understand the reason for that. But they already have people. In fact, I looked this up here. According to the salary search function on the transparency.ky.gov website, there is within our government 81 people employed with a job title that involves marketing. So we already have 81 state employees that have a job title involving marketing. Once again, what are they marketing? I don't know. But then on top of that, we're spending another $39 million on advertising. And who's some of that money going to? Well, according to what they just said right there, the second highest paid marketing company by the state is Red 7E. It has what's called a master agreement with the state. That means that any department can use them, and they have prearranged a rate. So they, what the departments do is they do a master agreement that they bid out, quote unquote, competitively. And then after it's been bid out, basically who's going to bill us the lowest amount per hour, not per job, but per hour. And whoever they land on that will bid the right amount for them, that, whatever their criteria is, gets this master agreement where any department within the state can go ahead and use their services without having to bid out what they're asking them to do. The problem with this, especially when it comes to marketing or any of these master agreements really outside of maybe legal work, is that, well, how do you know that for that particular job, they actually can do it the best and cheapest. Were they the cheapest for that individual job? We don't know. They just had the lowest hourly rate, but maybe they're taking the longest to get it done. And then the person who's got that agreement is a big Beshear contributor. Is that a shocker? But that's not it. This isn't even close to over. We're about 2 minutes into a 13-minute presentation on spending. And so we'll be discussing that more when we get back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Delicious. Oh, what's in here? Oh, well, what's in my tumbler here, the Andrew Cooperrider Show tumbler, available for sale at brewed.store, is 1776, a brewed coffee, a Kentucky proud product that's roasted right here in Kentucky, of course. You can pick yourself up a bag at brewed.store. Free shipping on orders over $85. And they're sold in per pound, both ground, whole bean, and K-cups. If you like your little K-cup machines, we have that for you too. And the best part is per pound, it's cheaper than most of the boutique freedom-loving coffees out there. And this one's made right here in your own backyard. I know that's fantastic. So pick yourself up. We've got 1776, a French roasted dark blend, which is historically funny because, of course, the French financed the revolution. And then also we have one of our other signature blends, Tyrant's Tears, a coffee that we meticulously harvest from famous tyrants like Annie Beshear, Pol Pot, and, of course, Mao. Additionally, we have other single origin coffees such as Cameroon Pea Berry, Kenya, Peru. Fantastic, fantastic blends. Go ahead and pick yourself up a bag today. Not only will you be supporting the show, but also you'll be putting in your mouth a delicious and tasty black nectar called coffee. So order yours today. Brewed.store. Once again, it's BREWED.store. Brewed.store. Free shipping. Orders over $85. Pick yourself up a bag and pick yourself up one of these spiffy tumblers. Andrew Cooperrider Show tumbler today. Once again, that's brewed.store. And you're back on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So we are going through the State Auditor's Office presentation to the Appropriations and Revenue Committee on the questionable expenditures that they found coming out of the Beshear administration. We left off with their advertising expenditures of nearly $40 million. Once again, what are they advertising? We don't know, but we're going to pick back up and hear more about what they spent some of this $40 million on. Let's take a listen.
And then the Kentucky Historical Society expenditure you see there. CHFS's Office of Secretary and Office of Medical Cannabis paid a single vendor almost $340,000 for the services that you see there. When we're quoting these services, these are direct quotes from the invoices and contracts that we see on EMARS. So this is not really us synthesizing the information. This is taken directly from EMARS. The other thing to note about that is this is essentially the level of detail that a lot of these contracts or invoices have. Sometimes it's a little more than this. A lot of times it's not much more than this.
So they hit upon Kentucky Historical Society paid $83,500. They kind of glossed over this one. Make sure you heard this. Kentucky Historical Society paid $83,500 for unspecified digital media services and professional services and materials, freight, reimbursable travel costs. What does the Kentucky Historical Society need? Nearly $85,000 for digital media services that involve materials, freight, and reimbursable travel costs. Like, the Kentucky Historical Society, their entire job is to, I'm assuming, to protect Kentucky's historical landmarks, right? And to display those, show them off, get people to visit them. Like, that's the whole job. And yet they're paying some other company to basically do what that entire department's supposed to do. Continuing on, though.
One thing to note about these particular expenditures is that competitive bidding was not used for these. We found a Form SPR-1 that was attached to these expenditures, which notes exemptions from the competitive bidding requirements to obtain these services. Continuing on with advertising, CHFS's Department for Aging and Independent Living, also known as DALE, paid a vendor $198,000 for a media campaign for the Senior Meals Program. And if you recall, a few months ago, there was an alleged shortfall that the governor announced in that program. We actually did a review of that issue and realized and discovered that the AD districts, Kentucky's area development districts, gave CHFS the correct number that they needed to have for their senior meals program, but CHFS did not relay it to this body, even though basically every member of this body on both sides said that they would take whatever they would pay whatever's necessary to fund that program. Another example is Dale also paid $17,275 to a vendor for the various products you see there. What's interesting about the 2,500 puzzle games is that there was communication that actually showed that there was a problem with them, and the state was attempting to seek a refund for them, but it's unclear whether the state ever got that refund. There's another expenditure by the Department for Community-Based Services where you can see $45,000 and what it was spent on there. And then we've noticed lots of media campaigns. For example, the Council for Postsecondary Education paid $300,000 to increase public awareness of the importance of a post-secondary education.
So to pause there, because I want to make sure anybody listening to this in the audio format hears, and because if you can't see this, I want you to hear what they spent the money on. Okay, so Department for Aging and Independent Living, maybe you remember this, and this is what he was hitting upon, and I talked about this on the show, was that like 6 months ago, I think. It was months ago. The senior meals program was under threat. And then Beshear was able to just like magically find from somewhere $10 million in order to shore up the funding into the meals on the senior meals program, where they bring them meals out to their home. And there's a lot of talk about how this happened, and at the time there's a lot of blame, especially by people in the media, being put on President Trump like it was the one big beautiful bill and their other budgeting, and they made cuts to this, and then that led to the shortfall. But actually, and we know this from prior hearings too, that they actually just didn't ask for enough money from the legislature, despite the Beshear administration knowing how much money they needed. So they were told accurately how much money they needed. The legislature said, hey, for this specific program, the Meals on Wheels, the senior meals program, whatever you need to fund it, we'll fund it. And so they brought them a number. And it just so happened that number was significantly short, $10 million short of what they needed. But they actually had the data they needed at that time to make the proper request. They just failed to do so. But at the time where they're falling short on money, they're dropping $200,000 on media campaigns for the program that they don't have enough money for. And also, they spent $17,275 for 3,000 brain stress relievers, 2,500 puzzle games that, as the chief counsel for the auditor's office was testifying about, there's actually a problem with them and they're trying to get a refund, but they don't know if they ever got them. 2,500 pins, 5,000 twist and chill fans, and 1,000 tote bags. And the Cabinet for Health and Family Services Department of Community-Based Services paid $45,635 for 1,300 collar-changing tumblers, 1,700 cotton canvas totes, 1,240 two-tone Himalayan tumblers, 400 for stadium cushions, 400 stadium cushions they purchased, 1,500 football rockets, 1,000 drink sleeves for 12 pints, and 600 sports bottles, and 1,400 antibacterial hand sanitizers with clips. So at least the hand sanitizer might be something Cabinet for Health and Family Services should be giving out. It might make people healthier. But for those of you that didn't keep track at home, that means they purchased all of, 1,300, about 1,500 tumblers, 400 stadium. What are the stadium cushions for? Community-based services. What are you buying 400 stadium cushions for? 1,500 football rockets. I guess that's like no name brand Nerf football or something like that. Drink sleeves for tall pints, because, you want to make sure you're drinking the big cans. 600 sport bottles. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And then they go on to talk about more media campaigns. The Council for Postsecondary Education paid $300,000 to increase the public awareness of the importance of a post-secondary education. In case you didn't know, in case people weren't aware college exists, they spent $300,000 making sure you were aware of that. Additionally, they talked about early on, they talked about money being spent on a COVID vaccine initiative because, people are unaware that COVID vaccines exist. Well, let's jump back into it.
Whether that included conversations about the importance of many other types of education outside of a 4-year college degree is unknown, even though those are many good paths for a lot of people that can make them very well off. On out-of-state travel, the state executive branch for fiscal year 25 spent almost $7.5 million. And what's interesting about that number is that is about almost exactly to what the alleged revenue shortfall for the income tax reduction that that we can give to Kentuckians if we cut back on $7.5 million of spending. About at least over $398,000 was spent using American Express cards. What's interesting about the AmEx cards is the level of detail that's attached to AmEx card use by agencies is very little. Sometimes you only see some sort of like a flight receipt or something like that. It's difficult to know what the flight was actually for. But we found at least $398,000 worth of expenditures on those cards. The Kentucky Department of Education in particular spent almost $1 million on out-of-state travel. We have an example of an entry that we found for $28,000 in flights for some individuals who may not even be state employees. We tried to look up all the people who were listed in the flight log and did not find some of them in the state system. The Council for Postsecondary Education spent at least $137,000 in out-of-state travel. An example of one of those expenditures is a $13,000 expenditure for 10 people to attend a conference in San Francisco. And then something of hot topic late is the governor's travel. Now, what people I think tend to forget is that the Kentucky State Police have to follow the governor where he goes to provide security. And that has not really been discussed. To be clear, I don't think anyone blames KSP for these expenditures. They have to go where the governor takes them. But we noted that they spent about $183,000 while providing security to the governor and other members of his staff. This is a breakdown of some of those expenditures. Some general points of note is that you'll see a lot of hotel stays. One of them, the Eau Palm Beach Resort, the Limelight Hotel in Aspen, the Montauk, if I'm saying that right, Laguna Beach Hotel, and then the Edgewater.
Talking about out of state, first off, some of these expenditures are about to go through are in other countries. The question is that, nobody knows who Beshear is outside of the state, certainly outside the country. I don't know what his security risks would be in somewhere like Switzerland. I don't know why he needs KSP to go with him to Switzerland. I mean, at Davos, he's at best a B-level attendee, maybe a C. He doesn't get his own speaking slot. He's on a panel with other governors to talk about things. That's it. But yet, Kentucky State Police had to go with him. Also, too, they have I'm confused on what they're doing in Europe because they don't have any jurisdiction there. Maybe they can get some special allowances from the government there to allow them to still be armed or something while they're with him. But it's still very strange. It's still very strange. And then when you go into some of these expenditures, exactly what they are, I mean, you've got $7,632 for a limousine in Germany, $1,016 for one dinner in Japan, $5,192 for services to navigate airport and gate services for all troopers, governors, first lady, and staff in Switzerland. Almost $6,000 so you know how to get around the airport? Here's another one. $10,953 for a stay at the Eau Palm Beach Resort. That's a 5-star luxury hotel. Almost $11,000 of your money spent at a stay at the Palm Beach Resort out of the governor's office. $678 for meals at the Democrat National Convention in Chicago. So he was literally there campaigning, using taxpayer funds to feed his entourage. But it's not just the governor's travel that's the issue. I mean, we're halfway through this. We're going to have more when we come back on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We'll see you here in a few short minutes. Do you hear that? I do. It's Beshear crying. Why? Because you're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. And I thought to myself, why should we let those tears go to waste? Like any good capitalist, I said, that is a resource that can be sold. So we capture those tears from Annie Beshear and other famous tyrants like Pol Pot, Mao, whoever else. And we collect them up and we put them into a delicious coffee called Tyrant's Tears, available at brewed.store. Once again, that's brewed.store. You can pick yourself up a spiffy Andrew Cooperrider Show tumbler while you're at it and get yourself a nice bag. Free shipping on orders over $85. We have Tyrant's Tears in 1776, our signature blends. We also have flavored coffees such as Swiss chocolate and bourbon for those of you that want a little kick without the buzz from, well, alcohol. You'll get the buzz from the caffeine, though. Check out today. Brewed.store. This is a Kentucky Proud product, roasted right in your own backyard. Brewed.store. Support the show. It's cheaper per pound than most of those other boutique coffees. And it's available whole bean, ground, K-Cups. However you make your coffee, we got you covered. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We're going through this presentation by the Auditor's Office to the Budget Review Committee and the Appropriations and Revenue Committee, in the House, talking about the governor's out-of-state travels. Let's continue. Let's dive right back in.
The Montauk, if I'm saying that right, Laguna Beach Hotel, and then the Edgewater Hotel in Seattle. If you look these places up, it's difficult to find a room for less than $800 a night. Some other interesting expenditures that we saw here was a $7,600 limousine that was rented in Germany, a $4,600 car rented in Switzerland. You'll notice some meal expenditures here. And then one interesting thing was that it appears that while in Washington, D.C., there were 2 traffic tickets accumulated that were charged to Kentucky taxpayers. But we have, this is a long list. You could view it at your pleasure. In-state travel, we spent a little over, executive branch spent over a little more than $23 million in in-state travel. Some examples here, we had noted a bunch of conferences that the Kentucky Department of Education sent people to. Obviously, a $360,000 conference for 75 people to attend. Again, that's in Kentucky.
So before we get into the conferences, I want to make sure you heard that. $23 million spent on in-state travel. In-state. Okay? In-state. So, Kentucky isn't that big. I'm going to be honest. I mean, it can be if you're trying to go from, Fulton County to or Pikeville or something, right? That can be a very long drive. I think it can be like 6-7 hours, I think. If you're trying to go from literally the farther western edge to the eastern edge. But, I got to be honest, right? So we know where the governor lives. We know where most of the state employees live. Frankfort, right? You can get from Frankfort to even western Kentucky in like 4 hours. Which, don't get me wrong, maybe you got to stay a night for like a 2-day thing. But how many occasions especially too, keep in mind, this is a time where people, we have Zoom, we have video calls. Spending $23 million for FaceTime within the state seems excessive. Especially when you start to get into some of these. I mean, because they're going to start listing them off. I want to draw one to your attention right off the top. $360,000 for 75 people to attend a 2-day conference in either Frankfort or Lexington. Frankfort or Lexington. The state we're in, keep in mind, the state owns properties to have conferences at. They have state parks that they own. They have conference centers that they pseudo-own. We spent, $4,800 a person for a 2-day conference in Kentucky for Kentucky residents. $4,800 for 2 days. $23 million. Let's pick it back up.
$222,000 conference for 450 people to attend, a conference in Lexington, $168,000 conference, $165,000 conference, and again, the list goes on. Some more in-state travel. DCBS had a $15,000 meeting at the Natural Bridge. The Department of Corrections incurred $23,000 in catering charges for an awards lunch. The Tourism's office spent almost $17,000 in hotel and catering costs for the Derby. And then DJJ, the Department of Juvenile Justice, spent over $16,000 for a seminar in Bowling Green.
$23,000 for an awards lunch for the Department of Corrections. $23,000. To put that in perspective, the entire Department of Corrections has 800 people in it. The entire department has 800. Obviously, somebody's working at the prisons. So even at $60, even if every single one of them went, let's just say every single one of the employees of the Department of Corrections went to this awards luncheon, that is $28 a person. If every single one of them went. That's not bad. But of course, somebody was watching the inmates. So the lowest amount they could have spent per head on a awards lunch was $28. I can tell you, I've gotten some catering before. I've had to cater awards lunches, everything else like that. Around $30, you can definitely do it. You can find plenty of places that could cater a lunch for $30 a head, especially when you're talking several hundred. We continue.
What's interesting about that is that we saw that 5 individuals actually didn't even show up to the conference. So there were $656 worth of expenditures for people who didn't stay in the hotel room that it cost. A bunch of groupings here. We have trainings, conferences, food, and trade show expenditures. The first one is an interesting one. The Tourism Cabinet, the governor's office, paid a combined $338,000 for Derby events to a nonprofit company called First Saturday in May. If you look up that company on the Secretary of State's website, it was actually started by the governor's former deputy chief of staff. And an example of one of the expenditures we noted there was a $17,000 dinner at Jephthah Creed.
Okay, so to say that again, the Kentucky governor's former deputy chief of staff starts a nonprofit like catering company or something, and then the government turns around and pays $338,000 for Derby events. The Tourism Cabinet does for Derby events. Almost $340K for a nonprofit started by the governor's former deputy chief of staff.
On the DPA side, the Department of Public Advocacy spent at least $153,000 for its 2024 annual conference, and then $189,000 for its 2025 annual conference. And we note here that these conferences were actually held virtually during the pandemic. We included a couple DCBS employee lunches and the full menu that was on the plate for those lunches.
So pausing on those lunches there, because this is important. Okay, so one of these lunches here, okay, is $5,581 for 2 fajita veggie bars for $20. So that is 40 people. They had 150 flour tortillas, 15 chocolate brownies, 115 chocolate chunk cookies. So, yeah, we're talking there was probably, let's say on the high side, 50, 60 people at this $5,581 lunch. It's like $100 a person for a Mexican lunch. Insane.
Staying with the same topic, the Council for Postsecondary Education made a lot of payments to speakers that came in. $30,000 to Cool Speak. I'm not really sure what that is. $14,000 for 2 speakers to talk about systemness. Again, maybe a smarter mind knows what that is than mine. $6,200 for a couple keynote speakers where we don't know much detail as to what was presented. And then another one to note is the $3,000 speaker to talk about strategies to cultivate growth, mindset, purpose, and belonging. Again, not exactly sure what that is. Moving on to staying in the same topic, DMS had a banquet that totaled over $34,000. We included the breakdown of how that came out. Again, this is all information taken from the invoices directly that were attached to the expenditures and EMARs that we saw. Similarly, on the same topic, KDE had a lot of expenditures for conferences. You could see some there, $84,000 for a conference where $41,000 went to food and beverage, $56,000 for an out-of-state conference, another $56,000 for a conference, and then more events and award ceremonies, meetings that you could see listed there.
So we'll come back. We're going to continue this conversation because there's more to be said. There's more to see here. We'll keep digging into it here today and continue giving you the breakdown. Don't know if I'll have time to get to Beshear's response, but we'll that when we get back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Hey, and you're back in this final segment of the Andrew Cooperrider Show, listening to this presentation on out-of-control spending within the state. We're going to dive right back in. They're starting off other notable expenditures. Let's keep listening.
Some other notable expenditures, as you said, Mr. Chairman, almost $70 million were spent in temporary manpower services. And if you remember, right now, the Department of Vehicle Regulation Division of Driver's Licensing is being investigated for an alleged black market of underground ID sales to undocumented non-citizens. The governor said that this was the fault of temp workers. Public reporting has shown that there were actually 2 state employees that were allegedly involved in this. But if it indeed is mostly temp workers, that division spent almost $8 million on those temp workers. We have a little over $51 million spent in services not otherwise classified. Some examples of some of those expenditures include almost $180,000 paid by the Department of Revenue for 300 chairs and their installation, which works out to about $600 a chair.
$600 a chair at the Department of Revenue. $600 a chair. A high-end, a nice office chair is like $200-$300. They paid $600.
There was a $70,000 expenditure paid by the Department of Workforce Development to Red 70, that company we talked about earlier, for booth work for the state fair. There are some more CPE expenditures for various meals. And of course, a $625 photographer charge by the Kentucky Historical Society. You mentioned that big topic, the other expenses, Mr. Chairman. There are about $120 million spent in these other expenses. This is sort of the miscellaneous code that a lot of entities use when they don't know where to put an expenditure.
So to catch that again, that's $118 million that was coded as just, we don't know. $118 million that they're like, I don't know what to put this in. So we're just going to put it here, and then you'll have to try to figure out what we spent $118 million on. You wonder why the government spending is just out of control. Here you go.
Almost $4 million spent on travel for non-state employees. Again, we noted an $11,000 expenditure for a seminar at the Boone Tavern. There's some other notable expenditures on here. More than $3 million spent on subscriptions. $10 million spent on dues. KDE itself spent over $1 million belonging to various nonprofit education organizations, one of them being a $434,000 cost to the Council of Chief State School Officers. Of course, the governor's office spent over $113,000 for the governor to belong to the National Governors Association.
Nearly $114,000 to belong to the National Governors Association. That's like an option. You just not be a part of it. $114,000. They said they spent $3.2 million on subscriptions. Subscriptions to news or something else. $3.2 million. $10.3 million spent on dues to various nonprofit education organizations, to the Governors Association, all these groups. That's just what the state's spending on these dues to belong to private-run entities. Your tax dollars just being given to these, so the government entities can say they're a part of this association. On top of that, that's just what the state's spending. Think about what your local governments are spending. Every single department has some sort of association they're a part of that they're shelling out funds for. It's just our money being just flushed down the toilet. Or some would say being laundered into key donors' pockets, so maybe they could be, handed back out to certain campaigns. Who knows?
And then the Economic Development Secretary Office paid a $2,000 subscription to the New York Times. There's a $1.5 million expenditure for promotional entertainment. You can see a little more detail on one of the expenditures there that Katie made. Then what's interesting to us and what we're trying to figure out is this SOVA Solutions expenditure. So in 2021, Kentucky received a $2.1 million grant from the James Graham Brown Foundation, which appears to be a philanthropic organization out of Louisville. What's kind of odd is that you usually don't see that. You don't see foundations and nonprofits giving money to the state to then hire somebody to do something. Usually you see the state giving money to the nonprofit or the organization to go do something. But nonetheless, the state received a $2.1 million grant. The CPE went out and used it, quote, to create a new statewide initiative, which ended up being the Kentucky Student Success Collaborative, that will help improve equity and close outcome gaps on college campuses. And what we could tell right now, at least we think that SOVA is a DEI firm, but putting aside that, it's really the nature of the transaction here that is a little bit odd. Right now, I think as many people know, we're sort of investigating the Department for Community-Based Services and their failure to execute Senate Bill 151, which is the kinship care bill, which is a bill that every single member of the General Assembly voted in favor of. It was unanimously passed. We note some expenditures here that may be of interest. One I'll highlight is the $481,000 that was paid to a single vendor for, quote, emotional injury evaluations. What's interesting about this one is that this is over $400,000 more than almost every other vendor for these same types of services, and $339,000 more than the next highest vendor. We looked at some of the invoices of this vendor, and we noticed, again, one thing of the impossibility of spending 20 hours in one day interviewing a single patient after allegedly starting that interview at 11 a.m. That's what the bill said.
So they're talking about how the Department for Community-Based Services paid $481,000 for a vendor for emotional injury evaluations, whatever that means. What's crazy about it, as they point out, is that was $340,000 more than the next highest vendor for the same services, and over $400,000 more than all other vendors providing the same service. A sample invoice shows questionable billing practices, including the possibility of spending 20 hours in one day interviewing one patient. So they're claiming in their billing, it's be fraud, of spending 20 hours with one person starting at 11. You didn't spend 20 hours evaluating one person in a day. Continuing.
And just finishing up here. This is another set of expenditures by DCBS. I'll just highlight two of them. DCBS paid $539,000 to a vendor that actually agreed to pay a civil suit judgment for improperly billing Medicare and the Kentucky Medicaid, And then another one is that last one, over $34 million spent for IT-related services. We're still trying to figure that out, considering that we have a state agency, the Commonwealth Office of Technology, that provides IT services, and then CHFS has its own internal IT group called OATS. So there's two resources there that we're trying to figure out. Maybe they're not being used as efficiently.
So spent $35,000 on IT services when they have two other already groups, staff, taxpayer funded, that they could choose from. I want to go through, I want to play you and stop them there. They're about done. Anyways, Beshear's response to Ball spending report here.
During his Team Kentucky briefing today, the governor defended his administration, saying the auditor's office did not ask questions about where the money is going.
As you can see, that testimony was wrong, and they didn't ask questions because it was merely a political attack. Listen, if you're in the auditor's office, just do the work. That's all we're asking. We don't have anything to hide. Are there expenses here and there that we can do better on? Sure. But if you're attacking us for dollars that went to foster kids because judges said that it had to? Those are questions you should probably ask.
He's zeroing hardcore on this foster kids thing because one of the items brought up was $6,000 given to Lexington Legends. That was money apparently spent on taking foster kids to a baseball game. And he zeroed in on that to talk about that. Like, oh, well, one, she didn't ask us any questions. Well, she went through her process. She went through the invoices you all filed with the explanation you officially filed. We shouldn't need an explanation on what you spent money on. We shouldn't have to ask more questions. It already should be in the system, one. Two, notice how he zeroes in on this. This is what they do. You find millions of dollars of problems, and they'll zero in on one expenditure, tiny, $6,000 out of the tens of millions that you just heard her go over, or her office, her chief counsel go over. And he zeroes in on this one where it was for foster kids going to a baseball game. And so we can just disregard, the $10,000 5-star beach and the limousine and the $1,000 dinners and the, tens of millions in marketing costs and promotional advertising. We can just ignore all of that because, there was $6,000 out of the tens of millions that had a good reason. So ignore it. Don't pay attention. That's weak. But you know what? The media's playing into it. Look at their headlines. They're talking about this foster kids baseball game. Oh, this is the controversy. No, the controversy is the tens of millions of dollars being spent. The controversy is the millions going to Beshear donors. The controversy is the lack of proper bidding. The controversy is the lack of information on the invoices. The controversy is the fact that we have tens of millions of dollars going to people to pay for services that we already employ people to do. That's the controversy. Well, that's what we got time for today. We'll see you next week.